Welcome back to For Goodness Sake, where, as a former Mormon, I take a look at the good things that I carry with me into my new, more secular worldview. My name's Tom, and today's topic is moral obligations. As a Mormon, I always believed that the concept of morality, in other words, what is right and what is wrong, was 100% linked to the will of God. In other words, whatever God wants is good, and whatever God doesn't want is bad. One of the biggest steps in my journey was realizing how absurd this is, because even if God did exist, and even if God did have certain moral obligations he wanted us to do, that doesn't necessarily make them right or wrong. They just make them aligned with his will. There's this really wonderful book named The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. One of the two main characters is named Ivan, and he never actually quite says what everybody thinks he says, which is if God doesn't exist, then anything is permissible. But that is the theme of the book. Ivan stops believing in God and ends up murdering someone for what he thinks are noble reasons. And Dostoevsky explores this idea in great depth. If we don't have a God telling us what to do, how do we know what to do and what not to do? And I do think that this is a big problem. I think it's a bigger problem than most atheists want to admit. I don't know how many videos I've watched of Christopher Hitchens making this point over and over that we shouldn't want God to be real. That if he were real, we would be living in a celestial totalitarian regime. In other words, if God was real, we should be up in arms against him to try to win back our freedom. And I think that this is true, and I think that this is a good point. However, I think what it discounts is just this huge feeling of loss of direction and purpose that most of us encounter when we go from believing in God to not believing in God. To me, the problem is less philosophical and more practical. I've grown up my whole life with these strong feelings of obligation to a heavenly parent. And now that I don't believe that heavenly parent exists, it's kind of like, what do I do with that? And it feels like Ivan supposedly said that, well, if God doesn't exist, I guess everything's permissible. I guess I can do whatever I want. And it's true that we can do whatever we want. But what are the limits? To me, the limit as we expand that idea, oh, okay, I'll do whatever I want. We have human beings to whom we are obligated, right? We have other people that are affected by our actions. And so if we feel an obligation to them, that's really the only thing that can replace the obligation that I used to feel to a God. So in short, yes, moral obligations do continue to exist even without a concept of God, as long as we're willing to acknowledge that our moral obligations were always to each other anyway. In other words, I used to feel like I was serving God, but effectively I was always serving other people and myself in a practical sense. As long as we're willing to let go of the idea of God, we can continue to be extremely moral and good people as we love and serve ourselves and each other. And we do it for goodness sake.